John Quincy Adams was born on July 11, 1767. He was the son of John and Abigail Adams. Currently displayed at Adams National Historical Park, the birthplace of John Quincy Adams is now open to the public. In 1779, he began a diary that he would keep until he died in 1848. The 50-volume journals are one of the largest and most extensive collections of first-hand information from that period of time. John Quincy Adams spent the majority of his youth accompanying his father in many of his overseas endeavors. In fact, at the age of 14, he accompanied Francis Dana as a secretary on a mission to St. Petersburg, Russia, to obtain recognition of the new United States. This early exposure to international interactions allowed John Quincy Adams to develop into one of the greatest diplomats in American history. However, he eventually returned back to the United States to receive an education from the same college his father attended, Harvard University. After earning an MA from Harvard, he practiced law in Boston. Going back and forth between America and England, he proposed to his future wife, Louisa Adams. Being born in England, she is the only First Lady to be born in a foreign country. Together, they had 4 children. John Quincy Adams' political career took off when he was appointed by George Washington to be the minister to the Netherlands. His work in foreign diplomacy earned the satisfaction of George Washington, who stated Adams was the most valuable of America's officials abroad. While his father was president, John Quincy Adams was assigned to be the minister to Prussia. In 1802, Adams was elected into the United States Senate. 6 years later, he was appointed by James Madison to be the minister to Russia. While in Russia, his time there solidified the recognition of America as a separate country in the eyes of the Russians, further validating his spot as a serious political figure. Adams played a crucial role in improving American diplomatic relations with the Russians. In 1814, Adams was finally recalled from Russia to play a substantial role in the Treaty of Ghent. John Quincy Adams worked his way up on the chain of command in Washington. With his political resume at his back, Adams had a surefire shot at the seat of the Secretary of the State. Adams served as Secretary of State in President Monroe's cabinet. Adams flourished in his time as Secretary of State. He was in charge of many pivotal acts that helped push America to further greatness. Treaties such as the Rush-Bagot proved that Adams was capable and exercising his learned diplomacy. In 1819, Adams negotiated which has said to be one of the greatest diplomatic victories. The Adams-Onis Treaty between America and Spain set many regulations for both nations. The western boundary on the Louisiana Purchase was modified from the Sabine River on the side of present-day Texas to the Red River. Spain also gave U.S. Florida. Adams negotiated the treaty for only $5 million. Adams was also the author of the Monroe Doctrine, that cautions European nations from making further attempts at colonizing territories in North and South America. Adams' diplomatic advances earned him the title as one of the best secretaries of state the country has ever seen. Adams' presidency didn't fare as well as his time as the Secretary of State. The controversy began with the election of 1824. The candidates included Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams. It came down to Jackson and Adams. Jackson had won the popular votes and the electoral votes, but not by the majority. It came down to the House of Reps to vote for who became the 6th president. Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, who also ran, had many attacks against Jackson. He decided to go with Adams. He created the Ohio Valley New England Coalition with representatives who would vote for Adams. In return, Adams appointed Clay as his Secretary of State. Labeled the corrupt bargain, followers of Jackson believed the alliance showed corruption within Washington. This proved to be a fatal flaw in Adams' presidency. Because when Adams favored a federal presence and economic expansion, Jacksonians believed it was for the elite in Washington to receive awards. Combined with the Jacksonians pressing on Adams and his dislike for office, Adams was forced to make the best out of a situation that wasn't exactly ideal. Nevertheless, Adams made the best of his 4 years in office. He, along with Clay, supported the American system. This economic plan called for a tariff to promote and protect America, a national bank to foster commerce, and federal subsidies for roads, canals, and other internal improvements to develop a profitable market for agriculture. Adams and Clay backed this plan without the support of the Jacksonians. He planned ambitiously. He wanted to modernize canals and roads, plus build a university and an astronomical observatory. Certain proposals were adopted, such as the New York Erie Canal and the Cumberland Road, where most were rejected. Adams passed the Tariff of 1828 that protected the industries that were losing business to low-cost goods. However, this hurt the exportation of cotton being produced in the South. As an amazing diplomat, Adams resolved all the foreign policy issues the nation faced. However, all of the problems were solved when Adams was the Secretary of State. The policies were long-term, so none of these issues rose in his presidency. His career in the White House began gracefully, but then took a rocky turn for the worse in his later years. In the election of 1828, Adams' main opponent was Jackson. Jackson had a personal vendetta to defeat Adams, so after the election in 1824, he dropped out of his Senate seat. He then spent the next 4 years running a personal campaign against Adams. Jackson took the presidency after John Quincy Adams. After his defeat to Andrew Jackson in the election of 1828, John Quincy Adams refused to attend Jackson's inauguration, just as his father had done during Jefferson's inauguration. Adams stayed in Washington for a few more months before returning to his home in Quincy, Massachusetts. Adams then ran for Congress from his Massachusetts district and won the election. His election proved to be one of the most satisfying victories. In Congress, Adams served 9 post-presidential terms. He supported the rechartering of the Bank of the United States. In addition, he opposed the annexion of Texas in the war with Mexico. Adams struggled greatest for 8 years to end the House's gag rule, which tabled any petition critical of slavery without debate. Throughout his term, Adams countlessly attempted to read into record all of anti-slavery petitions he received from abolitionists across the country. The House, in the end, finally repealed the gag rule in 1844. Being one of the House's most eloquent speakers against slavery, John Quincy Adams earned his nickname of Old Man Eloquent. Whenever he rose to speak, the entire chamber would remain quiet and devoted their full attention to the former president. In 1841, Adams argued that the slave mutineers aboard the Spanish Amistad should win freedom. The Africans aboard the Amistad had mutinied against their Spanish masters and then were captured by an American warship at sea. The Supreme Court ruled that the African Americans were considered to be free because international slave trade was illegal under U.S. and British law. John Quincy Adams had a love for education and championed James Smithson, who willed $500,000 to dedicate an entire institution solely to education. This institution would later be recognized as the Smithsonian Institute. At the age of 76, Adams even traveled to Cincinnati, Ohio to lay down the cornerstone of the Cincinnati Observatory. On February 21, 1848, John Quincy Adams suffered a severe stroke. This stroke occurred on the House floor in D.C. After the severe stroke, Adams slipped into a coma.
"This is the end of Earth, but I am content."
These were the last words spoken by Adams. On February 23, 1848, at the age of 80, he died. Mourners visited the open casket in an open house committee for 2 days. He was buried next to his parents, John and Abigail Adams, beneath the First Congregational Church in Quincy. Whom historians consider the most learned president in the history of the U.S., left his 8,500-volume library and additional notes behind for his only surviving son, Charles Francis Adams. He divided the remainder of his property between his wife and daughter-in-law, Mary Catherine Ellen Adams, and his granddaughter, Mary Louisa Adams.